She called a week later, her voice unusually calm. "Mama, I've been thinking, maybe it would be better if you came to live with me. That way I can keep an eye on you." For a moment, hope bloomed in my chest. I imagined mornings filled with her laughter again, evenings with warm meals, perhaps even the chance to watch her children grow. Maybe this was her way of making space for me, of realizing she still needed me after all. I packed my belongings into 2 small suitcases. Everything else, the furniture, the dishes, the memories, I left behind in the house that had been our home. I locked the door with trembling hands, pressing my forehead against the wood for one last moment. "I gave you everything," I whispered to the empty rooms. Then I turned the key and walked away. At first, her apartment felt bright, modern, full of energy. But very quickly, the walls seemed colder than my old ones had ever been. There was no space for me, not in her living room, not in her routines, not in her life. My suitcases stayed packed for weeks, shoved into the corner like I was a guest who had overstayed her welcome. She didn't mean to be cruel at first. She introduced me to her friends politely, but I could see the way her smile tightened when I spoke too long. At dinner, she served portions small and quick, conversation light and distant. If I tried to share a story from the past, her eyes drifted to her phone. And at night, I lay in the small spare room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled laughter of her and her husband through the walls. I wondered if they spoke of me, if they sighed about the old woman who had come to live in their home like a shadow they couldn't shake. The hope I had carried with me began to wilt. I realized I wasn't brought here to belong. I was brought here to be watched, contained. One evening, as I tried to help with the dishes, she stopped me with a sharp tone. "Mama, please don't. You'll just make a mess. Sit down, I'll handle it." I froze, the plate in my hands trembling. I set it down and sat, silent, my chest hollow. That was the moment I understood. I wasn't her mother anymore. I wasn't even her equal. I was something less, an inconvenience carefully managed. And though I told myself to be grateful for a roof, for food, for her presence, deep down, I felt the truth pressing against my ribs like a knife. I was no longer her family. I was her burden, and the burden would only grow heavier. The weeks that followed were filled with small wounds, tiny cuts that never healed. If I sat too long in the living room, she would glance at me and mutter, "Mama, don't you have something to do in your room?" If I tried to cook her favorite dishes from childhood, she would wrinkle her nose. "We don't eat like that anymore, it's too greasy." Even the sound of my coughing seemed to irritate her. "Mama, could you please not do that at the table?" she said once, as though I had chosen to grow old, chosen to grow frail. Her husband was polite, but distant. I could see the tension in his jaw when he returned from work and found me sitting quietly in the corner. He never said it out loud, but his silence spoke clearly. "You don't belong here." I tried to make myself smaller. I folded clothes neatly, stayed in my room for hours, walked slowly so my footsteps would not echo. I told myself that if I stayed quiet enough, invisible enough, they might accept me. But invisibility is its own kind of prison. The more I faded, the more they resented even the small space I occupied. One evening, after a long day of biting my tongue, I sat at the table and asked gently, "Do you remember the little red dress you wore on your first day of school? You twirled so proudly. She cut me off. "Mama, not now. Please. You're always bringing up the past. Can't you just let things go?" Her words silenced me more effectively than a slap. I lowered my eyes, staring at the plate I hadn't touched. The house around me felt alive with everything I wasn't allowed to be. Laughter I wasn't part of, dinners I didn't cook, stories I wasn't invited to share. I began to understand that no matter how quietly I moved, no matter how little I asked, my very existence was unwelcome. And though I tried to convince myself that love could survive in silence, I felt the truth growing louder every day. She no longer saw me as her mother. She saw me as an intruder. And soon she would no longer hide it. She would speak it plainly, with words so sharp they would leave me bleeding in ways I could never recover from. It happened on an ordinary evening, the kind you don't expect to shatter your world. I had spent the day in the small room, knitting quietly, listening to the sounds of her life unfolding beyond the door. Laughter, footsteps, clinking dishes, all of it without me. At dinner, I tried again to help, setting the table, pouring water into glasses. But my hand shook, and one of the cups tipped, spilling across the cloth. The water spread quickly, dripping onto the floor. Her eyes snapped to me, sharp as blades. "Mama, can't you even manage something so simple? You're always making everything harder." I froze, my lips trembling. "I'm sorry, darling, I'll clean it." But she didn't let me finish. She slammed her hand against the table, her voice rising. "Don't you get it? You're in the way. You don't belong here. You're ruining my life, Mama. You're ruining everything." The room went silent. Her husband lowered his eyes, not saying a word. My breath caught in my chest. I wanted to speak, to defend myself, to remind her of everything I had given, but the words never came. My throat closed around the ache, and all I could do was stand there, shaking. I felt smaller than I had ever felt in my life, smaller than when I was a girl cleaning other people's floors, smaller than when I buried my husband and stood alone against the world. Because this wound was different, it didn't come from strangers. It came from the very heart I had built my life around. That night, I packed my 2 small suitcases. She didn't stop me. She didn't even come to the door. I left quietly, my steps heavy, my chest hollow. I returned to the old house. Dust had settled thick across the furniture, the air stale with emptiness. Still, it welcomed me in a way her home never had. These walls had held my laughter, my tears, my life. They had seen my sacrifices, my love, my endless work. I sat in the silence, clutching my suitcases, and for the first time in years, I let myself cry freely. Not because of the loneliness, I had long been lonely, but because of the truth I could no longer ignore. To the daughter I had lived for, I was nothing more than a burden she couldn't wait to cast aside. And yet, even as I sat in that empty house, broken, one thought would not leave me. I would still love her until my last breath. But my story does not end there. Because the cruelest part of loving someone is not when they forget what you've done. It's when you realize they may never remember at all. The old house creaked as I settled back into it, as if it sighed at my return. Dust clung to the curtains, the pipes groaned when I turned on the tap, and the floorboards ached beneath my steps. Yet, somehow, it felt more like home than the bright, spotless apartment where I had been nothing but an intruder. Days blurred into nights. I move slower now, each task a mountain. I boiled tea. I mended clothes too worn to be worth the thread. I sat by the window watching seasons change. Loneliness pressed in from every corner, but I tried to make peace with it. After all, it was honest. It didn't pretend to be love while treating me like a burden. Once in a while, my daughter called. Her words were quick, businesslike. "Are you all right, Mama? Do you need anything?" I always gave the same answer. "I'm fine, my darling." Even when my chest burned, even when my legs refused to hold me, even when the silence in this house threatened to crush me, I never told her the truth. Because what would it change? Her heart had already decided I was in the way. But still, every night before I closed my eyes, I whispered a prayer for her, that she would be happy, that she would never know the kind of loneliness I carried, that she would remember, someday, somehow, that everything she had was bought with the life I gave away. And to you, listening to me now, I want to say this: love is not always returned. Sacrifice is not always honored. But a mother does not stop loving, even when her love is cast aside. If you still have your parents, call them, sit with them, listen to them, because one day their voices will fall silent, and you will realize too late that silence is the heaviest sound in the world. Write in the comments, if you could say one thing to your mother or father right now, what would it be? Say it here, but more importantly, say it to them while you still can, because when they are gone, you will carry those unsaid words forever. And me? I worked until the end for my daughter. I gave her everything I had, and when she told me I was in the way, I still loved her. Until my last breath, I always will.